Hey everyone, Pat Lopez here again. So I'm back with Dr. Amelinda Webb, and we're doing the first of a couple of background videos for um, our, our our vaccine education program, I guess we could call it. Ask a Scientist, Ask a Nurse. Um, and so what we'd like to start with is something called herd immunity, which is an important concept, really, to understand in connection with this vaccine, right, Amelinda? And it's funny because it kind of has a negative connotation a little bit, right, when we say herd immunity, because it sort of implies that, animals are like, or people are like herd animals, and it's not very flattering. But I guess I look at everything through the lens of a biologist, and particularly I'm an ecologist, and herding is a term from ecology, really, and it describes a type of behavior that a lot of animals have evolved to do over thousands and thousands of years, and it actually serves them really well, right? So if we think about wild animals that are herd animals, it's pretty much everything on a hoof, with a few exceptions, right? So pronghorn and elk and bison um, if you think about the function of that behavior, when I think about it, let's say, for example, let's take bison as an example. Um, not all bison are equipped to deal with the predators that they face, like wolves, for example, right? So if they're really old, or if they're sick, or if they're little calves, they're not going to be able to defend themselves against a pack of wolves. And so when a herd of bison is being threatened by a pack of wolves, because wolves famously hunt in packs like this, the most vulnerable members of that population will crowd in towards the middle, and the adults will actually form a circle around them with pointy ends outwards, right? And that's a formidable defense for wolves to breach, and the entire group benefits as a result of that. So, and that's the aspect really that we're talking about, I think, when we're talking about herd immunity with vaccinations. But why don't you, Dr. Webb, tell us a little more about how that applies in vaccines?
Well, one of the things that came to mind when you were describing the wolves and the bison is that birds and fish do the same thing. I mean, we call it flocks and a school of
Schools,
fish,
right?
but it serves very much the same purpose. By grouping together, they can help get protection and avoid some of the dangers. So in that case, it's actually really helpful. But when we start talking about what herd immunity actually is and what threshold we have to reach, how much of the population, how many people in this case, would have to have immunity for that to be a protective breach. I know that there's been a lot of misunderstanding and the idea of, oh, if we just let everybody get sick, then we'll have herd immunity. But
Right.
it's going to take a lot to get there. So I've got a couple of visualizations that I put together to actually help with that. So give me just a second to get my screen going. All right, so herd immunity is just defined as community immunity. It occurs when the majority of the community has resistance to an infectious disease. But just like we saw when COVID-19 first entered the human population, we had a whole bunch of people with no immunity. So the very first person was infected and they entered the community, and we saw the spread happening incredibly rapidly. So we've been trying to avoid this with the shutdowns, with wearing masks, with things like that. But without slowing down the spread, this is what the scenario we were facing. So everybody gets sick when there is no herd immunity. But it's going to take time to get there. So if we go to a case where maybe half the population is vaccinated, and then we get the infected person that comes into the community, then we're still going to see spread. So here we've got a little bit of herd immunity, but we haven't actually reached the full threshold. And you'll see that a large portion, over a third, still got sick. So this is not desirable, especially when we're talking about something like COVID-19, which can have such awful effects on the people who get sick. Some are lucky, some are lethally unlucky. Now, once you get the majority of the population fully inoculated, there's going to be a few who aren't going to be able to. Babies, people who have compromised immune systems or are allergic to one of the components within the vaccine. So, those are the people who can't take it. But if everybody else does, we have that same infected vector coming into the community, the spread stops. It is most of the people who can't get vaccinated or who don't get vaccinated can be protected, but you have to reach that threshold. Otherwise, we'll still see a lot of people getting sick.
So in other words, those two yellow dots there for unvaccinated persons who are unvaccinated for whatever reason, right? Maybe like you said, they're too young to be vaccinated, or they have a compromised immune system and they
Mhm.
shouldn't be vaccinated medically. They're still protected by, the adult bison around them, basically,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And so I have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
Are you saying then that there are two different ways to reach herd immunity? One is like just allow the unchecked spread of the virus to just like run its course through the population. And then
Tech-
the other one is vaccination.
yeah, technically, if we just let it spread through the entire population, eventually herd immunity could be reached. Except when we look at these kinds of viruses, they're mutating, they're evolving. We can already track the different strains of COVID 19 and tell whether this particular outbreak came from the strain from Europe or from China, from a specific region. So it obviously started in Wuhan, and that's where it's all spread out. But we've seen it change, and we can actually track the genetic changes. So that's kind of a gamble, and that means a lot of people are going to die, and a lot of people are going to have lingering effects
Right.
from getting COVID-19. So while technically it's possible, probably not though, given how fast the virus evolves. The best way to get herd immunity is to get people vaccinated as soon as possible.
Right. And then also, I think everyone's immune response is a little bit different, right? I mean,
Mhm.
what we've seen with this virus is that how differently it affects people. And we've already seen that people who have been infected once can be reinfected, actually.
Mhm.
I think probably with the advantage to the vaccine also is that the vaccine response is much more predictable and it's much more controlled, right?
Yeah.
Versus because things like the viral load really matter also, right? Like, did you get a face full
Mhm.
of COVID from someone, or is it just just a little bit of it, just maybe not enough to make you super sick? And so that's the problem really with letting it run rampant through the population. And the other problem with it too is that like you said, if everyone is sick at the same time, we're seeing right now how it's really straining our healthcare system,
Yeah.
even though we're trying to control it through other measures like physical distancing and mask wearing and things like that. So, all right, well, super helpful. One thing I forgot to mention again is that we are taping this on December 20th, and you talked about mutating strains. I did hear today that in southern England they've identified a new strain that transmits particularly rapidly. So
Yeah.
there's no sign that it's more lethal than the
Mhm.
regular strain, but they have identified it as being one that spreads super rapidly. So um,
Or even last month, there was the story with it jumping from humans into minks, and Denmark had to cull millions of animals because the fear was it would jump over into the minks and start to mutate even further and then jump back over. And there were
oh,
concerns that it would actually have a higher spread and potentially more lethal version.
oh, ooh.
So yeah, yeah, it's happening, and that's we don't want to leave room for that to
To
happen.
occur. Okay. Well, that was super helpful. I love the animation. Thanks a lot. And thanks for watching, everyone. And we'll see you again soon.
Bye.